Synesthesia is a neurological phenomenon where the incoming information from one sense triggers a perception of two senses. For example, some people can hear music and it will taste like fruit to them, or they may see a color when a particular note is played. The mixing of perceptions has to do with areas of the brain interacting with each other to respond to the same stimulus. While the exact details are not yet known, it is likely that this is a result of extra synapses existing between such areas. In the case of grapheme color synesthesia, after the visual stimulus is processed by area 17 of the occipital lobe, the information is sent to the region that processes numbers and letters, which is located next to the V4 region. This region is responsible for color and typically is not used in processing written figures. In the instances where enough synapses connect the two areas, the signal from the stimulus is altered as it moves to a level of higher processing at the TPO junction, an area where the temporal, parietal, and occipital lobes meet. In the end, the signal causes the brain to perceive something extra associated with the true stimulus and project that perception on reality.
I have grapheme color synesthesia, which means that when I see letters, numbers, and words, I see them as the color they're written in and another color as well. So, for example, 1, 2, and 3 are white, blue, and yellow, and A, B, and C are blue, orange, and green. I've always had synesthesia, even though I didn't know that's what it was called until I was 14. I thought everybody saw colors and numbers, so I didn't think it was worth it to bring it up. It wasn't until I came across an article in 8th grade that I realized, no, not everybody sees what I see, and there's an actual name for seeing colors that aren't really there. I've never been a fan of self-diagnosis, so I didn't actually tell people right away. My parents first noticed that something else was going on when I described the word "the" as symmetrical to them. Green, red, green. They were understandably a little confused, so I explained what synesthesia was, and they took me a professional to find out if that's what was really happening with my brain. So now I'm an official synesthete. I see the same letters and numbers that you see in the same colors that you do, only they tend to be highlighted in another color as well. So for me, I tend to see most commonly yellow, green, and orange around them. Words also have their own distinct colors. So, for example, blue is blue, even though the letters are orange and 3 different shades of green. Not at all. I actually think it helps me remember things like phone numbers or formulas, because it's much easier to remember the order of colors than the orders of numbers or variables. Synesthesia also kind of acts like a built-in spell check for me. Like, if a word is spelled wrong, then the color balance as I remember it is thrown off. Or if a letter is added that shouldn't be there, then it really stands out to me, and I know where to fix it. So, overall, having synesthesia is more like being left-handed. People interact with the world in a different way than I do, but overall, we don't interact that differently. No. A lot of synesthetes tend to see A and 5 as red, for example, but that's not the case for me. I see them as blue and green. In fact, part of the reason that scientists believe that synesthesia is based partly on the experiences of the individual is rooted in the fact that synesthetes don't always have the same responses to the same stimuli. It's difficult to figure out just how many people have synesthesia because of how many types there are. And like me, most people tend to go through life thinking they're just like everybody else until someone tells them otherwise. Another thing that makes determining this so hard is that most people have similar little associations between unlike stimuli that can be called synesthetic.
Is everyone a little bit synesthetic? We conducted a survey to find out. First, we asked participants some general questions concerning gender, age, and race or ethnicity. Then we asked them to identify which objects seemed more like a kiki to them. We anticipated that the participants would associate the harsh sounds of the word with harsher lines. Thus, we hypothesized that more participants would choose the object on the left. To avoid participants just choosing the first choice, the survey randomly switched up the positions of the choices. We then followed up with a question asking if the participant had been asked this question before. If the participant had, his or her response was thrown out to avoid bias. We had 150 responses, 135 of which were usable, meaning that the participant had not been asked a question about the kiki before. Of those 135 participants, about 2/3 were female, 78% were between the ages of 18 and 24, and 64% were white. To find out whether or not our data supported our hypothesis, we conducted a chi-square goodness of fit test, which determines statistical significance by comparing the expected proportion of a certain response to the actual proportion. In our study, we compared our results to the expected proportions we would have gotten had there been no difference between the preference of objects, each object gaining about 50% of responses. Since 51% of participants chose the smooth line shape and 49% chose the harsh line shape, our p-value was 0.8875, which is larger than our alpha value of 0.05. Thus, we failed to reject our null hypothesis. We cannot conclude that there is an association between harsh sounds and harsh lines. The original experiment was first conducted in 1929 by German-American psychologist Wolfgang Kohler, in which he showed shapes similar to the ones on this slide to participants on a Spanish-speaking island off the coast of West Africa, and asked them which one was a taquit and which one was a baluba. He suggested, though did not outright state, that there was a strong association between the harsh line shape with taquit and the smooth line shape with baluba. Then, in 2001, two researchers repeated Collier's experiment using the words kiki and buba with American college students and Tamil speakers in India. In both groups, over 95% selected the harsh shape as the kiki and the smooth line shaped as the buba, implying that our brains connect abstract meanings to shapes and sounds in a constant way, and showing that we all have these synesthesia-like connections. With results this strong, how were we not able to replicate these findings? There were three major faults in our survey that likely contributed to our results being so vastly different from those found before us. First, since it was a survey, the words were not spoken aloud. Thus, participants may have pronounced the words differently from what was intended, thus weakening the association between the harsh sounds and the harsh lines. Secondly, there were no time limits on how long the participant had to make a decision. When we did the kiki/buba test in class, we were asked for our initial reaction. Prolonged time could have made participants overthink the question and thus make their response different than what they thought initially. Lastly, and this one is the most important, we did not include buba as a word for comparison. With no contrasting sound, it is impossible to tell whether or not an association exists. Thus, if we were to do this experiment again, we could include sound bits for the participants to know how the word is pronounced, give participants a shorter amount of time to respond, and modify the question to ask which shape is a kiki and which is a buba.